leadership11.com.
Welcome to Leadership Role. I'm your host, Dr. Kitty, and today we will be talking about the Dark Angels, the Unforgiven, as the first part of a short series of a Dark Angels Codex review. In this episode, I'll be talking about the Dark Angels Special Rules, the Special Issue War Gear, the Chapter Relics, and the Warlord traits of the Dark Angels. So to jump right in, Dark Angel Special Rules. Dark Angels share a lot of the same special rules as Space Marines. Most of the models have "and they shall know no fear." They also have combat squads. Combat squads is a rule that first appeared in this book that allowed 10-man squads to break into 2 5-man units. What's different in this than the previous books was it defines that 2 combat squads that shared the same dedicated transport can both be in the dedicated transport. So for instance, if you took 10 tactical Marines and bought them a Rhino, you could have the 2 5-man squads in the Rhino. Even though under normal transport rules, only 1 unit can be in a transport at a time. Now, one of the other major changes to this is when you combat squad. And the rule list immediately before deployment. Now, previously, the combat squads rule allowed you to decide when you deep strike a drop pod, for instance, that they could split at that instance. Now you have to decide that they are combat squatted inside the drop pod before it becomes available for deployment. And it's a subtle change, but it is pretty important. It does take away the flexibility of being able to change your tactics on the fly. Or I guess in this instance, on the drop. But the ability to take, especially for the ground transports, the 2 units in the same transport, I think is a pretty major change. Another rule that the Dark Angels have that the Space Marines do not now is something called Grim Resolve. And that is, a model with the Grim Resolve special rule has the Stubborn special rule. So the Stubborn special rule means that the unit does not take modifiers for pinning or morale tests. Now, the Stubborn rule also in the previous edition, in 5th edition, you never took any modifiers to your leadership at all. That is not the case in 6th edition. And Grim Resolve specifically has an additional rule where they cannot choose to automatically fail a morale test. Now, that only comes up in combat and only against models you cannot hurt. A classic example of this is a squad of guardsmen fighting a Space Marine dreadnought. Without grenades, they literally cannot harm the dreadnought at all. Or in the same regard, fighting a Wraith Lord or Wraith Knight. They're not strong enough to get through its massive toughness or armor, so instead they can choose to fail the morale test to continue fighting it. Now, this does put you in danger of being caught by sweeping advance, but for Space Marines who are not destroyed by sweeping advance, they simply have to stay and fight as if they were fearless. This isn't really a big disadvantage. For guardsmen, it's very likely that they'll get overrun and just killed, but sometimes you want that so that you can shoot him, yada yada. It's definitely a tactical decision. Dark Angels don't have this option. However, Space Marines in general don't have this option, as there's very little that they can't hurt in combat due to the fact that they all come with crack grenades. Another rule that Dark Angels possess is something called Inner Circle. Not all the models have this, but a model with this special rule has the Fearless and Preferred Enemy Chaos Space Marine special rule. So against Chaos Space Marines, anything out of their Codex, they'll reroll 1s to hit and wound. And they're also fearless, which does trump the "and they shall know no fear" special rule. This rule definitely comes into play, I think, more often than the Grim Resolve, as because of how sweeping advance works, most Space Marines aren't really concerned if there's a negative to their leadership. If they run and they're caught, no big deal. If they run and get away, more often than not, it's advantageous for the Space Marine. They do automatically regroup because of, and they shall know no fear. So it's almost more of a penalty, I think, to Dark Angels. And it does, fluff-wise, represent that they are very stubborn. Their older interpretations of the rules, they had a rule where if they rolled a 1 at the start of the shooting phase, at the start of the turn, actually, they couldn't move, and they had to shoot at the nearest enemy or something like that to represent that they're very, stubborn in the face of the enemy, and they're just going to shoot no matter what. It was similar to the old Blood Angel rule, where if the Blood Angels rolled a 1 at the start of the turn, they moved d6 inches forward, but counted as moving. It was free movement, but it meant that your Devastators and whatnot just were not an optimal choice for Blood Angels back in the 3rd edition rule set. But on to Warlord traits. Each of the codexes have their own Warlord traits table, and the Dark Angels are certainly no exception. So the first Warlord trait they have is Rapid Maneuver, and this allows your Warlord and any unit he joins can either roll 2 dice when they run, using the highest roll, or can add d6 inches to any turbo boost they make, or flat out move in the case of Samael and the Land Speeder. This is definitely a great Warlord trait if you want to get right up into the enemy's face, but it is only 1 unit, so it better be an important one. The next one is the Hunt, and a lot of the special characters have this one. It is, if your Warlord or the unit he is with slays the enemy Warlord in the assault phase, you score an additional victory point. Now, if you can manage to do this, this is pretty key because it is a free victory point, and those can be hard to come by. The next one is Courage of the Lion. The Warlord and all friendly units within 12 inches of him roll an additional dice when making leadership tests, discarding the highest. There is a lot of fearless models in the Dark Angels book, and it's very easy to become stubborn because they come with it if they're not fearless, and your characters have the ability to pass their leadership on to others. There's a bunch of different standards that let you reroll. This is probably the worst one out of the bunch. The next one is called For the Lion. The Warlord and the unit he is with have the Furious Charge special rule. Pretty good for Terminators with Lightning Claws. You can be Strength 5 and they reroll a wound, so not too bad. The next one is Brilliant Planning. While the Warlord is alive, you can increase or decrease your reserve rolls by 1. Choose after you roll the dice. So if you have a certain plan with what you want your reserves to do, this would be pretty key. The problem is that none of the special characters have this one, and you have to randomly roll it unless you take Azrael, who gets to choose one of the Warlord traits. The last one is Hold at All Cost. The Warlord and any Dark Angel unit he is in, so no Battle Brother units like Guardsmen or other Space Marines, they gain the Feel No Pain special rule while they're within 3 inches of an objective. There is a similar Warlord trait out of the main book that only gives the Warlord Feel No Pain within 3 inches of an objective. This is a Dark Angel unit as well. So it's a little bit better, and it's the rule of a 6. But again, if you take Azrael, you can just choose one of these, and it's part of the advantage of taking the expensive Chapter Master character. So on to special issue war gear. Now, the war gear that's specific to units, like the Deathwing weapons or the Avenging Mega Bolter, things like that, I will talk about when I talk about the units. This is just the special issue war gear stuff that your characters can take as long as they're not one of the special characters. So the first one up is an Auspex, and this is the first time it appeared. It's in the Space Marine Codex as well. And what it does is a model equipped with an Auspex can use it in place of making a shooting attack. If he does so, target an enemy unit within 12 inches. Does not count as choosing a target for his unit to shoot at, however. And the unit targeted with 1 or more Auspex has its cover saves reduced by 1 till the end of the phase. If you take a character like, say, an Interrogator Chaplain who doesn't have a good shooting weapon or maybe not a shooting weapon at all, this is a great thing to give them, as another unit's going to be able to benefit from this. They also have the conversion field, and a conversion field is a 4-up invulnerable save. At the end of the phase in which a bearer passes one or more invulnerable saves, all units within D6 inches of the bearer must test as if they had been hit by a weapon with the blind special rule. Friendly units get to reroll. So it does affect everybody, and blind can be pretty devastating at the wrong time, and it's pretty interesting, really. Another field they have is the displacer field, and this is a 3-up invulnerable save for the model carrying it. If he makes any of the invulnerable saves at the end of a phase, he suffers what they call displacement. A model that suffers displacement is immediately scattered D6 inches. And you get to reduce the scatter so that you don't appear within an inch of another unit or impassable terrain. Now, at the end of the assault phase, displacement happens at the end of the initiative 1 step after blows have been struck, but before assault, the combat result has been tabulated. So it is possible to teleport out of combat, so even if you lose, you don't technically lose. It's kind of interesting, and it's a decent save, so it's not a bad item. It is fairly pricey points-wise, though. The next one is the Improviser. It gives the model the night vision rule, which is great because if he's with a unit, they all benefit from it. However, they count as initiative 1 for blind tests. So if you're fighting somebody like Eldar with a Sun Cannon, that could be kind of bad if they're shooting you with it. But again, for that first turn shooting, especially on your Devastators, it's really not that bad. The next one is the Perfidious Relic of the Unforgiven. It's a big title, and there is a lot of fluff about this because this particular war gear is generally represented by one of the Watchers in the Dark, little Jawa-looking robed guy who carries this thing, usually a sword. It comes in the Deathwing box. And there's a whole paragraph talking about how this model is a marker. It doesn't count for anything. If it's in the way, move it, whatever. They could have just summed it up by saying, hey, this thing's a marker, and that's it. But the Perfidious Relic of the Unforgiven, the models in a unit that include one have the Adamantium Will and Fear special rules. So they get the +1 to the Knight of the Witch, and they have probably the lamest rule in the game, because Fear is pretty much worthless. The next thing is the Portorak. If the bearer kills an enemy character in close combat, he then gains the Fear and Preferred Enemy special rules. In addition, your army may now use enemy teleport homers and locator beacons as if they were your own. You literally beat the secrets out of them. That's pretty awesome. However, if you're fighting against, say, Chaos Space Marines, you already have Preferred Enemy. They don't have teleport homers. So, next is the Power Field Generator, and this is interesting. A model with a Power Field Generator, and all models, friendly and enemy, within 3 inches of a model with a Power Field Generator have a 4-up invulnerable save. So, that means they obviously can give this invulnerable save to the enemy, but as long as you keep a tight group, everybody in your unit can get a 4-up invulnerable save, which is nice if you don't have cover. Now, of course, there's other special issue war gear, but these are the ones specific to the Dark Angels. Other than the Auspex, like basic Space Marines don't get them. Things like the Portorak and the Perfidious Relic are definitely very Dark Angel flavored, so they're it's pretty interesting. They do, of course, have access to Space Marine bikes and camo cloaks and stuff like that, which is listed in the special issue war gear, but they're fairly common, so I decided to kind of skip over those. So next we'll go to the chapter relics, and there's only a handful of these, not counting the sacred standards, and these are pretty much weapons. They replace a weapon generally for the hero who takes them. So we'll just go through them real quick. The first one is Foe Smiter, and Foe Smiter is a Assault 3, AP 4, Strength 4, Stormbolter that's mastercrafted. That's it. The next one is Lion's Roar. It's a mastercrafted combi weapon. And it has a plasma setting that's Strength 7, AP 2. Salt 1, Blast, gets hot and also mastercrafted, which is pretty decent. The next is the Mace of Redemption. It's plus 3 Strength, AP 3. Has the Bane of Traitors rule. It's blind and concussive, so kind of like a Thunderhammer. The Bane of Traitors rule, it's 1 AP lower against models from the Chaos Space Marines Codex. Next is the Monster Slayer of Caliban. This is a goofy weapon that at the start of each fight subphase, the wielder is locked in combat. Roll a d6 to see which profile the Monster Slayer of Caliban uses. So the first one, the bad one, is Strength as User, AP 3 melee. No big deal. 2 through 4, it's Strength plus 1, AP 3 melee. And 5 and 6, Strength plus 2, AP 3 melee, and causes instant death. So if you can roll a 5 or a 6, it's pretty good. Then next we have the Shroud of Heroes. The Shroud of Heroes confers the Feel No Pain special rule, and in addition, if he's not in a unit, he has the Shrouded special rule. So that's a rundown of the special rules, Warlord traits, chapter relics, and special issue war gear for the Dark Angels. The next episode, I will talk about the Sacred Standards and the Command Squads, as they're the only ones who can take them. And we'll move on with the HQs. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, go ahead and send us a line down at Leadership 11. And otherwise, we'll see you on tomorrow's episode.